I'm very biased to this because it's had a massive impact on my life, but I'm a really big fan of coaching. And really, when you look at coaching, it's really accountability. What I know to be true is human nature. We tend to disappoint ourselves the most. However, when we commit to someone else, interestingly enough, it should be the exact opposite. But when you have someone that you actually are being held accountable to, a lot of times you don't want to disappoint that other person. So for me, and I've seen this hundreds and thousands of times, I'm an anecdotal experience of this. When you hire, and I actually recommend hiring because when you pay someone, there's an energy exchange and there's a level of commitment that if you don't do that, that doesn't exist. And you reduce the probability for success. But when you hire someone to hold you accountable, especially if they have an area expertise or they've been where you want to go, you're going to dramatically increase the probability for success.
This is the Play Your Position podcast, where we huddle up, call the plays, and inspire you to run your ball into the end zone. Are you ready to score more game-winning touchdowns in your life, business, and career? Then listen up, because it's game time, baby. Now, here's your host, Mary Lou Kaiser.
Hello, Team PYP. Mary Lou Kaiser here. Welcome to today's episode of the Play Your Position podcast. I am so grateful that you've decided to join me and my amazing guest today because we are going to take you inside a leadership journey unlike any other you've heard. And you're going to learn some things. You're going to be inspired. And hopefully when you walk away from today's episode, you're going to have some new ideas about business opportunities, about how to take care of yourself and your family, and what it means to lead in a complex, challenging world. My guest today is Bryce Henson. Bryce, are you ready for kickoff?
Mary Lou, let's go.
Yeah, let's do this. So team, I'm going to share some things about Bryce, and then we're going to get right into it. Bryce is the CEO of Fit Body Boot Camp, the world's oh gosh, I've got to put my glasses on. This is terrible. The world's fastest growing fitness boot camp franchise. Having nearly 20 years of fitness business experience and owning his own Fit Body location, his passion is spreading fitness to the world through business coaching. Through Fit Body Boot Camp's worldwide growth, Bryce has overseen hundreds of gyms successfully launched throughout North America. Most importantly, he helps his franchise partners grow their profits while helping to offset the obesity epidemic. Bryce enjoys world travel and is a fitness expert, coach, author, and inspirational leader. And like I said, team, he is going to take us inside the world of fitness franchising, along with what it means to be a leader in today's world. So Bryce, let's get started here. Tell us your story about when you first got the call to leadership. How old were you? What was going on in your life? And how did those particular circumstances play a role in what you're doing today?
Ooh, that's an incredible question. It's a loaded question. I'm going to give you an answer that probably is unconventional, but I was actually 8 years old when I first felt the burden / responsibility of leadership. And it was a blessing actually disguised as a tragedy. And the reason I say this is I lived in Southern California for the last 20 years, but originally I'm from the Midwest. But even more so, the first 8 years, I should say, I spent in Atlanta, Georgia. And my parents ultimately had a very volatile relationship. And the reason that is my mother is an angel, bless her heart. But my father was a drug addict. He was addicted to alcohol and gambling, not necessarily the trifecta for a good family upbringing. And I was young at the time, so there was a lot of chaos going on behind the scenes that our mother tried to shoulder us from. And when I say our, meaning I had two younger siblings. But ultimately, the arguments that were very verbal eventually became physical. And as the story goes, late after a weekend bender, my dad was out, drinking alcohol, doing drugs, gambling, and, came back and lost, thousands of dollars, which is a lot of money for us at the time. And as you would imagine, my mother, who was raising her 3 kids, was, not really excited at the behavior and exchanged some few choice words. And before you know it, the verbal argument led violent, and my mother found herself on her bed. My dad was over her, really large man, and she was gasping for her breath. And by the grace of God, my sister kind of came running through and distracted my father, and she slipped his grip. Her knees hit the floor, and like a bat out of hell, she ran out of that house. And then really our lives changed. In the next 48 hours, we were on a flight to Michigan, and I spent the latter part of my childhood there. Mm-hmm. And my mom was out of the workforce for about 15 years. So she did everything she possibly could, raising 3 kids, working, 9 to 5. She didn't have a lot of professional skills at the time because she was dedicated to being a stay-at-home mom. So she was making secretary salary type minimum wage. And it was very challenging, as you would imagine. Definitely. We used to run out of money before we used to run out of a month, and just, facing those challenges. But really to kind of put a bow on this, I think watching my mother struggle and seeing her, really be courageous and, have strong work ethic, it really instilled to me a strong sense of work ethic, a strong sense of self-reliance, realizing that no one's coming to save you. You need to save yourself. And ultimately, I felt a burden of responsibility, not only for my mother, but ultimately my 2 younger siblings. And I think that was really that first kind of, time in life where I realized, hey, I'm only 8 years old at the time, and I'm certainly going to rely on my mom for a lot of things, but I also need to carry my own weight and also help with the family, help with raising my brother and sister. And really, Mary Lou, that was the first time that it was really called from a leadership perspective.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing a very personal story. It's not one that we want to hear, but it is reality for it was obviously your reality. And I think there are listeners who will resonate with the not so idyllic situation, and witnessing something that as a child you just don't understand, but it does affect how you think about the world. And so fast forward, here we are, Bryce, and you're leading this company. You're a business coach. You're helping other people live their dream through business ownership. Tell us more about why you chose this particular path over everything else you could have done. You ended up here. What's the the connecting the dots when you look back?
Well, it's interesting. I think I give a keynote that's the 3 P's of really purpose and fulfillment, which really is pain, passion, and then purpose. And I really strongly believe that human nature, we have to go through pain to develop a passion for something. And actually, passion is a root word of Latin called suffering. Really, when you think of the passion of Christ, it's really the suffering of Christ.
Really?
Yeah. So
I didn't know that.
It's Latin passeo is the word.
Okay.
But I think when you go through pain, you develop that passion and ultimately, create a purpose. And, to kind of put a bow and really reflect back in the story I just shared, I'm not certainly alone. And you hit this as well as many of your listeners, whether it was the exact story, probably not the exact story, but probably rhymes in some way, whether you had, a parent, a family member with an addiction issue or an alcoholic issue, or just really challenging, turbulent situations. Human nature, we all go through pain. And I think that's really why I want to share that story, because many people can relate, and I'm not a unicorn there, but
no.
When I tie it back to really how I got involved in the fitness industry, we anchored it around leadership, and really I've always kind of felt that I was meant for something more. I wanted to lead a really strong organization, but really why I came through fitness is growing up in the Midwest, the latter half, a great place, amazing people, but not necessarily the fitness capital of the world. So especially from a financial position, fast food is way more affordable than sometimes healthy food, even though long-term, that's not a really good route to go. Between that and also the culture of the Midwest, especially 25, 30 years ago, wasn't really overly fitness focused. So I found myself when I was 21 years young, I got a job opportunity that pushed me out to Los Angeles, California. I was excited to be in California, the palm trees, the blue skies, the beaches. But also the plastic capital of the world. And, I was 3,000 miles from home. I had more dark days than good, very little professional skills to offer the world. And really, I wasn't fit. I was 20 pounds overweight, 20 pounds of muscle that was not on my body at the time. And I remember, this is kind of such a trivial but embarrassing story, but, growing up and, we were very social tribal beings, human nature is. One of my buddies gave me a hard time and actually made a very painful joke at a pool party with a bunch of my peers and girls. And he told me, he said, "Bryce, it looks like you have islands for nipples." Oh. And I looked at it, and it's still to this day, Mary Lou, it's funny because I don't know exactly what he meant, but what I gathered was I had an undeveloped chest. I wasn't a fit guy. And really, that was the pain point that got me to think. And I knew this, that I needed to probably be a little bit more focused at working out and eating well. But that was really the catalyst to actually hire my first fitness mentor, get on a program. He introduced me to fitness and circuit training and lifting weights and clean nutrition. But most importantly, Mary Lou, he introduced me to coaching and accountability. And when I went through a personal or fitness transformation of my own, which I trained with him for about 2 years, but really 6 months hyper-focused. Yes, I got the physique I was looking for. I dropped 20 pounds of body fat. I put 20-pound lean muscle on, but really I changed my life. I became one of the least performing sales rep in the company, all the way to the highest performing sales rep in the company, gained energy, confidence, enthusiasm. And really, to kind of put a bow on this aspect, that's what really created that, pain, which I just talked about, the passion, and then really it's developed to a purpose. And that story that I just shared with you is in 2007. So we're shooting this in 2023, nearly going on, 20 years, but that can leave a mark on people. And it certainly did for me.
Yeah. Well, I can resonate with the teasing, because I was chubby as a girl. I was always the tallest kid in my class all the way through elementary school. So, back in the 70s, when I was in elementary school, the school photo, the class photo, they would always put the tallest kid in the middle. So there I am with, big chubby, and I was teased mercilessly, and it was very painful. So I resonate with that. And I remember reaching my adolescence, and again, I think everybody can recognize that we are vain creatures, and I wanted boys to like me, and I'm like, they're never going to like me if I'm fat. And so I started researching what I could do differently, and this was back, I don't know if you remember, like Tiger Beat magazine. Some of these magazines, but I learned about eating clean, and I got into jazzercise. And anyway, my point in sharing that story is because I think it is universal. I think when we're young, particularly, if somebody says something about our appearance, whether we're too skinny, too fat, too short, too whatever, it really makes a mark, and it can lead us to our calling. And clearly that's something that happened for you. And so again, 16 years you've been on this journey. Give us some stats about your business. How many franchises are there in North America? And who is somebody that makes a good franchisee for this particular business?
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you for that. And yeah, I'll kind of, give you those metrics. I'll kind of also backstory a little bit in terms of how I got there. But, Fit Body Bootcamp, I'm very, very humbled, because even I look back, and this guy from the Midwest with Taco Bell and fast food as a staple, was allergic to lifting weights, has now become the CEO of an international fitness franchise, which is still bonkers to me, if I'm being very candid. But my message to you and your audience, especially if you have those, self-limiting beliefs, which I've had, we all have as human nature, is we are way more capable than we think, which is really, one message that I want to share with you and your audience today. But we've scaled, over the last decade to hundreds of locations throughout North America. We have 230 active open locations with almost 300, in territory development, mainly in the US, but also about 10% in Canada. Okay. And our mission is to inspire fitness, change lives every day. That's the passion. That's really the purpose of our organization. And, we do that by serving our global clients, which we have tens of thousands of them, but really providing a business opportunity for franchise partners who have a passion for fitness and people, which is the first thing that we look for, because at the end of the day, we are in the people business way more than we're in the fitness, nutrition, or coaching business. And we really like to start there, because what we've seen, Mary Lou, and I've seen over the last, going on, 12 years now, being part of the brand, joining in 2012, is we have the structure, the support, the standard operating procedures, the playbook, but really people can sense if you're in it for the right reasons. And the best franchise partners, they take that guidance, they take that playbook, and they execute, but they really put people first. So that's where we really like to start. The second, quality and characteristic that we look for, which is also for our global clients as well, is coachable, because we know that our franchise partner, our global clients who get the best fitness and fat loss results, are the ones who actually follow the coaching of their coaches at Fit Body Bootcamp. And the same is also true with our franchise system. The best and most successful franchise partners who are coachable follow what we call the Fit Body Way, and which is really our standard operating procedure and how we execute. And then lastly, is growth mindset. And this awesome podcast that you have about inspiration and leadership and business growth and development. What I've learned about leadership is leaders are learners. And, if you lead with your title, which at the end of the day is a recipe for disaster, you'll never really garnish the accolades and not necessarily accolades, the support and the buy-in from your team. So in order to do that, you have to be in a constant state of curiosity, of learning. Mm-hmm. And there's a gentleman that I really follow. His name's Craig Rochelle. He's an expert leader. And he says that, people follow leaders that are real, not necessarily who are right. And I think for me, that just means being real, authentic, being willing to learn, being vulnerable. And, if you can we look for those three characteristics in terms of our franchise partners: passionate about fitness and people, coachable and growth mindset. And certainly, people watching your show today, I probably would imagine they have those same characteristics. Otherwise, they wouldn't be tuned into you, Mary Lou.
Yeah. I mean, the life journey, which fitness and health are such a part of, if we don't feel well, if we feel sluggish, if we feel run down, which can be the side effects of not working out, of not following our passion, which is I'm still thinking about how passion has this root word in suffering. I did not know that. Now my brain is kind of going, wait a minute. So there's the business side of your company, certainly the opportunity there for somebody who might want to start a business, but not their own. So talk to us about what are the pros of buying into a franchise opportunity? Because it's again, as we were talking about in the pre-chat, I mean, as consumers, we go out all the time and we're surrounded by franchises. They're everywhere in all communities. There are the obvious fast food ones. You mentioned a couple earlier. People may not be as familiar with a fitness franchise, but just from a business model, what makes being a franchise owner so cool versus going out and trying to start your own thing?
That's an incredible question. And I can give you some, highlights and bullet points, but I think the best way is actually just to give you insight from my perspective and why I joined Fit Body Bootcamp as first a franchise partner, which I did back in 2012. And before I actually tell that story and kind of give you some, mental bullet points on why I was attracted to a franchise opportunity. I mean, to your point, franchising is everywhere. My brother, Barrett, who's our executive director of coaching and profitability, and I just got back actually on over the weekend on Saturday for a week trip in Manila, the Philippines. We have some remote teammates there. We're pouring in from a culture and relationship perspective. And, there was probably 10 American franchises within a mile radius in terms of, our hotel. And we were actually not staying in the touristy part. One of the biggest accolades and the value of the trip, we were staying deep in Manila with Filipino people, dear friends. And even so, it just goes to show you how, international and global our world's becoming. Especially when it comes to franchising. But, neither here nor there, kind of going back to the bullet point, I joined in 2012 after I went through my own transformation. Then I thought the most logical thing to do is become a certified personal trainer. So I did that. I ended up updating my Facebook profile to personal trainer, and I started receiving ads from this gentleman named Bedros Keuilian, who turns out was the founder of Fit Body Bootcamp. He's a dear friend, a business mentor, and a business partner of mine to this day. And really what he was talking about was, how to grow a fitness business, how to get clients better results. So I started, following along for about a 2-year period. And in 2012 was really when I made the decision, the scariest decision in my life, but also the most rewarding decision is to really invest my life savings in this little dream of business ownership through Fit Body. And Mary Lou, to really kind of go a roundabout way of answering your question, for me, what really attracted me to the opportunity of franchise system versus doing your own. I had learned in my previous career that I just, shared about, how I had transformation. I was in sales, and actually because of that personal growth of fitness, journey, I actually became one of the highest performing sales rep in the company. So I, developed the sales skill. But what I realized from a business ownership perspective, not only do you actually have to make the sale, which is really make the conversion of the phone call coming in into a client, but you also have to make the phone call ring, aka marketing. You have to run the operations, the fulfillment of the business, the coaching and follow through. You have to follow through, with your clients. So you have to have develop strong leadership skills. You also have to run the human resources for component. So being a business owner, it's not just a one skill, one trick pony, if you will. You run the whole operation. So for me, I looked at it and I thought to myself, okay, I would like to think I'm a bright guy. Can I figure all this stuff out my own? I'd like to think so. I figured out the sales component, and certainly I'm going to take some other action steps to learn leadership and management and human resources and operations and marketing. But instead of me trying to reinvent the wheel, why not actually partner with a franchise system who actually has all that support, has already created the wheel, and I can actually just implement the playbook. And, fast forward now, just to give you some examples and really what we hang our hat on, we actually guarantee our new franchise partners that they're open their gym by their grand opening on day one with over 100 paying members, or we'll run their marketing until you do. And, from my lens, it's just a no-brainer actually to partner with a proven model versus reinventing it on your own. So to put a bow on it, if your audience is listening, is like, hey, I'm interested to inspire fitness and change lives through, fitness and through business ownership. My question would be, do you really want to spend all that time, energy, and resources figure on your own? Which, if you're listening to this, you're probably smart enough to do so, but at what time or cost or energy? And that's really the value of a franchise, can time collapse all that for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm thinking about people who know young people who are just starting out, and the whole world of once you get through, and at least here in the States, once you get through high school, not everybody wants to go on to college. First of all, it's become prohibitively expensive. Ooh. And not everybody wants to go serve in the military, though that is a viable option. My nephew is currently serving in the U.S. Army, but
thank you.
It's not. Business ownership is another path. And the last, 15 years or so, since really the rise of the internet and social media particularly, I think of like 2007, which you mentioned earlier, is kind of that pivotal year when, Jobs introduced us to the iPhone, and then that drove all these social platforms that we now just are part of our backdrop. We don't even think twice about Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, but that was a wild time back then. So this whole generation of kids has grown up. They're now in their late teens, early 20s, and they're looking around going, well, what can I do? And it's been made sexy to become an entrepreneur. We went through that whole Silicon Valley phase, and they had even made that show, right? Silicon Valley, which depicted what that's like. But it's not for everybody. And so it's nice to hear someone on the inside of a franchise opportunity talk about why something like this could be a viable option and give you a good life. Make sure you're aligned with the opportunity, certainly, but you don't have to do it all yourself, right? It's like you're buying into a proven system, and the fact that you have that guarantee of, listen, we're going to get you clients. That's a huge stopping point for a lot of people. Like, well, how am I going to get people in the door? And you guys have figured that out. So that's cool.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And, to that point, I couldn't agree more. There's a lot of paths. College, it's a whole nother topic of conversation. I went to school at Michigan State, and I put myself, so shout out to you and I guess to me, but it's been very, very prohibitive, even the last 10 years. And I can rant on it for a long time. And certainly there's some value for some people, but really the one size fits all in college, in my humble opinion, is not a good, solution to look for. What we've actually found, a lot of, some more successful franchise partners actually are coming, from the military. They serve their, 4, 8, maybe sometimes 12 or 20 year stints. They have that structure of the military. They've learned some professional skills, and they want to be part of something bigger than themselves, which is another kind of value of a franchise model. But also too, they just like they had a playbook in the military, their standard operating procedures, the directive. A lot of times our military people actually make some of the best franchise partners because they can actually execute a game plan.
Yeah.
But even if you're coming right out of school, now, if you're 18 or 20 years old, you're probably not going to have the funds to actually put together a business, and that's okay. But what I would recommend, if you're interested in fitness, as an example, at Fit Body Bootcamp, we have a 12-week new coaches onboarding playbook, which is really a paint by numbers approach to really provide all the training, support, guidance from interpersonal communication skills, from a coaching skills, from a technical perspective, from a nutrition perspective. And whether you're interested in fitness, nutrition, or any other, type of, I guess, career, I would highly encourage you to actually join a workforce, join a company that actually can provide that training. And, I'm a very business and money focused person. So marketing, leadership, persuasion, salesmanship, those are really high impact and high income skills. So if any of those fits you, to be able to link yourself with a company like FitBody or any other franchise system or company that can provide you that training in the first 5 years, out of high school, that would be invaluable if you dedicate yourself to that, that learning mindset.
It's halftime here at the Play Your Position podcast, and we've got ourselves a great game. While you're up grabbing another snack and topping off your favorite beverage, make sure to subscribe to the show so you never miss another play. PYP is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever great podcasts can be found. Now, let's get back to the game.
It is. And it's so good to hear somebody as passionate as you are explain this kind of opportunity that isn't necessarily made common. I have another nephew who's about ready to graduate from high school, and he's more geared towards the 4-year post high school track where, the kind of work that he wants to do is going to require a degree.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, I'm a former high school English teacher. So it was pushed constantly, 4-year school, 4-year school, 4-year school. And yes, you're right. An 18 or 20-year-old may not have access to the funds to actually buy into a franchise unless they have really great persuasive skills and someone in their life that says, listen, I believe in you and I will back you, right? But I love that almost the stair stepping is get those persuasion skills, the sales skills, the marketing skills, learn about business, all the things while doing something is, wow, that's so much more powerful than maybe some of the alternatives. I love that. And I'd like to shift gears slightly and talk about the connection that you see, Bryce, between taking care of ourselves through fitness, through nutrition, through investing in a mindset, right? And reading and learning and growing, and success as leaders in our lives, in our families. And also if I do have people that work for companies, I have people that are on their own. Mm-hmm. From your vantage point, what are some of the, the latest insights in the fitness world that listeners might not be aware of in terms of how do we take care of ourselves in 2023 moving forward?
Yeah. Well, I'm very biased to this because
that's okay.
Had a massive impact on my life, but I'm a really big fan of coaching. And really, when you look at coaching, it's really accountability. What I know to be true is human nature. We tend to disappoint ourselves the most. However, when we commit to someone else, interestingly enough, it should be the exact opposite. But when you have someone that you actually are being held accountable to, a lot of times you don't want to disappoint that other person. So for me, and I've seen this hundreds and thousands of times, I'm an anecdotal experience of this. When you hire, and I actually recommend hiring because when you pay someone, there's an energy exchange and there's a level of commitment that if you don't do that, that doesn't exist. And you reduce the probability for success. But when you hire someone to hold you accountable, especially if they have an area expertise or they've been where you want to go, you're going to dramatically increase the probability for success. I mean, think about you, Mary Lou. You're an English teacher. You obviously speak extremely articulately. You write English, I'm sure, very well. You read and write. So it only makes sense for your students to basically hey, I want to develop, my communication skills and be more articulate to learn from you, who, has been there and done that. So I think that's a really big starting step, number one. Number two is this fallacy that we need to basically, go from not working out at all, not taking care of ourselves, all the way from 0 to 180 degrees, at first. And that's just part of human nature. Mm-hmm. But there's a famous adage, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is one bite at a time. So instead of, thinking, okay, I haven't worked out since high school, I'm 40 years old now, and I'm 50 pounds overweight. I'm going to start a fitness program tomorrow by myself. but I'm going to spend 3 hours at the gym all day, and I'm going to meal prep every single meal, and I'm going to eliminate fast food. That's an incredible goal to aspire to, but the chances of actually you sticking with that more than 30 days is actually pretty low. So instead of taking that approach, hire a coach, realize that, hey, if I can just commit to 3 times a week, okay, to start, put it on the calendar. And then instead of trying to feel like you need to crush a 3-hour workout, why don't we start with 30 minutes or even 20 minutes to start? Our program at Fit Body Bootcamp is 30 minutes. We do high intensity interval training sessions, but even if you were actually even to start 15 to 20 minutes a day for the first 2 to 3 months, 3 times a week, like for your workouts, that would make a huge difference. And I'm a huge fan and believer, and we know this to be true, Mary Lou. You've seen sports game before. There's something very true about momentum. You can feel it when all of a sudden the crowd starts to basically get behind a team. The ball starts to bounce that way. And what happens is when you actually start to stack these small wins at first, it might seem small and trivial at first, but actually what you're doing is you're creating more confidence and more belief in yourself, but you're also stacking momentum. And before you know it, you look up 3 months later and you're like, okay, well, I'm not where I want to be yet, but holy smokes, like I've committed myself. I have a 3 times a week workout routine. I'm feeling better. And then in the famous words of Tony Robbins, progress equals motivation. And if you can actually gain some progress, you get that motivation momentum. So, really from a starting out perspective, those are a few strategies that I would say that really will increase the probability for long-term success.
I love those. It is just start and be. I mean, it's great. One thing to dream. I'm a big believer in having that big vision, right? The big dream. But I understand that wanting to go from 0 to 100. I've been there, not with fitness per se, but with other parts of life. And that's what I love about what you just said. It really applies to anything. It could be money management, for example. It could be some kind of creative project, like writing a book, for example. Like people want to be like, oh, I want to be an author. I just, it's all up here and I'm gonna get it out. It's like, there's a process, and you got to start and just make those little wins. And then the other piece that I think is so important that you just brought up is when you get to whatever the mileposts are that you've set for yourself, whether it's at the 90-day mark or the 6-month mark or even the 1-month mark, stop and celebrate the wins. Look back and see where you were instead of going, oh, I'm not there yet, which is, again, human nature. Like, oh, I thought I would be farther along, but look where you came from. Right. So I'm glad that you really described that piece. Always look back. Don't spend a lot of time there. You can't go forward looking in the rearview mirror. Right. But sometimes it pays to say, okay, I'm sleeping better. I'm not as stressed. I'm not coming home and reaching for the bourbon or the glass of wine like I used to be, or whatever it might be. Right. So great tips. Great tips. What about food? Okay, that has to be something, and I agree with you about a coach. It's we live in a world where it's so easy to DIY things because we have access to the YouTube channels and Instagram and even podcasts like this, which one of my goals is to inspire listeners, Team PYP, to go deeper than what is discussed on any particular episode. Maybe go look something up, go visit your website, for example. But talk to us. I know working with a coach on fitness would also involve nutrition. But just generally speaking, what are we up against in this country when it comes to our food supply, as you understand it?
Oof, this is a big one.
I know, but it's a leadership question because we have to eat.
Totally. Well, I think we're up against marketing, and I'm a marketer. So it's interesting because I'm, tattling on myself to some degree. Now, why I'm so passionate about the fitness industry is because, generally speaking, I'm passionate because it changes lives. So I market very, very hard, and rightfully so. But also too, when you look at the food industry, what I like to say is fact and nutrition is on the back of the box. Marketing is on the front of the box. And I think, from a tactical perspective, that's something just very, very important to pay attention to. I also, you mentioned something recently in our last chat or topic of conversation about like, this could apply to anything. Well, really what we're talking about, especially in the fitness industry, I've been a student of human nature and actually behavioral change. So whether it's fitness, whether it's nutrition, whether it's finance, whether it's learning a language, like these habits of understanding human nature and actually adjusting or behavior change is really the foundation, and it can apply to anything. So I always look at it from that perspective. And taking a step back also too, the reality is we live in a time of abundance, and it might not feel that way at the time, but this is the first time in human history that statistically that you as our listeners have a higher probability of dying of obesity than you would of starvation. And that is the first time it's ever happened in the history of our species. So actually, when you look at it, the obesity epidemic is a symptom of abundance. And I think that's important because when you think about it, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago, no one had a stock fridge at literally any hour you could basically go consume food. Our bodies are actually evolved, with time to like retain fat because we don't know when our next meal is. But the problem is that technology and the level of abundance has happened so quickly that our bodies are actually at work against our current state of abundance versus the evolutionary track. So I think I frame it that way to start with actually gratitude, because I think that's a really important part of the equation. I don't know if that makes sense to you, Mary Lou.
It does. It does. I did not know that stat. I mean, I know that we have an obesity epidemic in America. Just go outside, be in any public space.
Yeah.
But that is a flip, isn't it?
It is. And it's not even in the States, it's the most pronounced, or it's not even the most pronounced, but it's very, very pronounced across the world. But even in Asia, I was literally in the Philippines, which is a third world developing country, beautiful country, amazing people.
Yes.
Very humble from a financial perspective compared to the States. But even there, like people are getting bigger, people are getting larger. It's like the world is actually, if you look at the data, turn off the news, the bad news, because if you turn off the news, it's like everything's burning down. And granted, I'm not to say we still have our fair share of problems here in the States and across the world, but actually, it's the safest time statistically that human nature has ever been. Our homicide rate is the lowest it's ever been. The level of abundance it's the best it's ever been. The level of prosperity, the financial aptitude across the world is increasing at a really steady rate. So I always like to start with that perspective, because we can always get really down on ourselves. Yeah. But really, this is a situation of abundance first and foremost. And then really kind of giving you some other tactical advice. Sounds interesting. And I didn't believe it for the first time, but one of my first fitness mentors I referred to is actually used to compete in bodybuilding shows. And the biggest recommendation he always said is, Bryce, you need to drink more water, because human nature, we are dehydrated. You have your water. There we go. I have my water with me. Not only is that just incredible, hydration is incredible for your body. You need it. Vast majority of our molecules are made up of water. But many times the feeling of like hungry, that sensation we get is actually not hunger. It's actually being thirsty. So that's another like really nutrition hack, that if you actually drink more water, you will lose weight, you will feel better, and you'll actually perform at a higher level. So those are a few bullet points. I can go on, but I wanted to start there.
Like that. No, that's good. And I also, you're the first one who said it this way. And I want to reemphasize this because I think it's powerful, and it is a double-edged sword, because any of us who are in business, we're also in marketing. But when you said that we are up against marketing, that's the biggest force. That was like an aha moment for me. Like, of course, and if you're into sports like I am, and I presume you are, we just finished March Madness as of this recording, which is one of the greatest competitions because it's just so authentic and so heartfelt. And I always pay attention to advertisements in tournaments. I look at them at the Super Bowl, during the World Series, certainly during March Madness, because I'm a student of marketing, and I'm like, okay, so where is the big dollars going, right? What are the messages? What kind of audience profile have they put together? And one of the most prevalent products, if you will, that is marketed during sports are these sports drinks. Okay. And one of the key words in those sports drinks is hydration. Now, I'm not here to get down on sports drinks or, tear any kind of thing down, but you didn't say you should be filling up on sports drinks with electrolytes. You said water. Hydration is water. Okay. I know from looking at the bottles of, I won't name names, but I've looked at the bottles of how much sugar
Ooh.
is in one bottle. And most bottles are 2 servings. So you look at, 44 grams of sugar times 2. And I'm sure you're familiar with some of these documentaries that have been made over the last, 10 years or so about sugar consumption. And of course, there was Super Size Me that was really put into perspective, like what happens to the body when all you feed it is something from a place like, Burger Place, for example. And I guess my bigger question here, tied back to what you do and the show, in terms of inspiring and educating listeners, is what do we do when we're marketed to death by, and it seems so plausible, right? We hear the messages like, oh yeah, that's going to replenish my electrolytes. The average person, as I understand it, we're not losing electrolytes. It's an athlete who, like, LeBron James or somebody who's running up and down the basketball court and sweating profusely for 2 hours. But the average person who's just going out 3 times a week to work out, I don't know what. I guess what I'm asking you, Bryce, is from your expertise, how do you guide us to avoid buying into the marketing messages when they are so incredibly seductive?
They are. And they are for a reason. They work. And I think it's just about awareness. It's about sharing the message and, realizing, again, going back to that point, you're right. Like in the front of the label, it's like the electrolytes, the hydration, and they have like the graphics and, all that look healthy. But then you flip the back of the lid and you see the back and you have 80 grams of sugar that you're consuming. That is a recipe for disaster, not only from a fat gaining perspective, but also too, like long-term health, like type 2 diabetes. You're going to have a lot of complications, and sugar is highly addictive. So, there's no magic pill. It's hard. If it was easy, everyone would be fit. So it's having an understanding first and foremost that the road ahead is hard. But, really, if you look back at your life, and I'm sure your listeners can relate, I want you to think of a time. Think of something that you're just so proud of, so, incredibly fulfilled with. Now, chances are it was actually very hard to attain that. Okay. Something that's given to you, people do not value free. So when you actually look at this, you have to realize that, kind of come to terms with the fact that fitness, it's simple. It's actually getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep, drinking more water than you're doing right now, working out just 3 times a week, 30 minutes a day. It's 2% of your day. If you do those things actually consistently over the course of your life, you will be fit, you'll be happy, you'll be healthy. It's not easy, okay, but it's simple. But you have to understand, first and foremost, I'm a huge component of Stoic philosophy. And Stoic philosophy talks about, taking a challenge and actually making that into a triumph. And I shared the story at the very beginning. While it was a tragedy at the onset, it actually was the best thing possibly, because I developed this vigor, this leadership characteristics and the quality that I want to be the guy that I needed. And really, that's my value and offering to the world. And without that traumatic situation, I wouldn't have accomplished that. And really kind of, putting a bow and coming back to this particular narrative on the nutrition, it's not easy. You have to understand that we're up against a lot. Okay. We're up against, human nature. We're up against, the marketing. We're up against the abundance that we have that we didn't have a few hundred years ago. But take that and accept it and realize the road ahead is going to be hard, but you can do it and it's worth it. And if you stick with it, it can change your life. And I think, from an inspirational perspective, that's what I really like to lean on. And that's what's really helped me and the thousands of other clients at Fit Body Bootcamp worldwide.
Yeah, that's great. So for people that want to check you out, where do you hang out online? Do you have an Instagram profile? I would imagine you do, because that's such a visual medium. But do you also a website, YouTube channel? Where can people find out more about you, Bryce?
I appreciate it. Well, I have a podcast as well called the
Fitness. Cool. Yeah, right. Of course.
Yeah, thank you. So the podcast is called the Fitness CEO Podcast, so that you can tune in there would be the best way to kind of gauge in dialogue. But also to your point about Instagram and also LinkedIn and Facebook and all the other social medias, you can find me at Real Bryce Henson, not to be confused with fake Bryce Henson. So that's where you can find me.
Oh my God. In this world of deep fakes, my goodness. Wow. And that's another thing we're up against. There's a lot of people that hang a shingle out saying, I'm a fitness guru. And they put up some photos of themselves, pumping iron or stuff. But I think you've helped educate us. You really want to do your due diligence, and team, this is why I bring you conversations like the one I've just had with Bryce, is because first of all, you can trust me. I vet people. I'm not going to just bring on somebody who's not walking the talk. And if you're watching this, you can obviously see Bryce is very fit. If you're listening to this, trust me, Bryce is very fit. You can tell he's got that brightness in his face. His eyes are bright, which is the mark of good health. I think one of the hardest things for me, because I do subscribe to clean living as much as I can. Now, I'm going to veer off now and then because I do like occasionally a little too much steak or an extra glass of wine now and then. But generally speaking, we do have an epidemic in this country. And for me, it's exciting that there are people like you, Bryce, who really are so passionate about education, about approaching this from a much bigger standpoint than just get to the gym and work out. It's really that whole package where you're not just looking at the body, you're looking at the motivation, the mindset, the starting where you are and being gentle with yourself while also pushing, which is that's a tough rail to ride sometimes because you are dealing with human nature. People want results yesterday. And, it took someone maybe 20 years to gain that extra 40 pounds. It's not going to go away overnight. But I'm curious, who are a couple of your role models, people that you see out in the world who maybe that they're older, like who's in their 60s or 70s or even 80s that you're aware of? Maybe they have an Instagram profile or you just know them, who embody the philosophy that you represent that we could all look to and go, that's what I want.
Oh, yeah. Well, two come to mind, and they're mentors from afar. I've had the privilege actually to share the stage with one of them. The other I have not at this point, but a gentleman named Jocko Willink, and he's a U.S. Navy SEAL. He wrote the New York Times bestseller, Extreme Ownership. And actually, we were talking offline about how leaders are learners. The book Extreme Ownership really taught me the value of leadership, the value of accepting personal responsibility, and really the value of leading not only your team, but yourself. And it starts with you. So he's an incredible mentor from afar. He's the one gentleman that I shared the stage with back in 2019, which is just a very serendipitous moment. And this other gentleman who's been actually a little bit more controversial, and I'm not a political guy, and he's not by trade a political guy. He's actually a clinical psychologist by trade, but a gentleman named Dr. Jordan Peterson. And he's taught me a lot about life and about accepting responsibility. And actually, one of the big things I've learned from him is actually not to chase happiness, which is interesting. It's counterintuitive because happiness can be fleeting. Human nature, we're actually just these big ball of emotion. And sometimes we're happy, sometimes we're sad, sometimes we're fired up, sometimes we're mad, sometimes we're angry, sometimes we're depressed. These are all emotions that just come and go. But one of his big call to action, which actually gave me so much fulfillment and actually reinforced my current path at life, was he said, chase meaning. And if there's a big burden that you are equipped to bear it. And when you chase meaning, when you accept responsibility in your life, typically good things happen and you'll actually acquire fulfillment, which long-term is actually way more valuable than happiness. So those two legends, Jocko Willink and Dr. Jordan Peterson, are just two, really big icons in my mind. They've taught me some of the lessons I've shared and many more.
Fantastic. So you mentioned Extreme Ownership, which is a book I've heard about. I have not yet read. I have so many. So what are, I think Dr. Jordan Peterson has at least one book, if not, what is the book that you've read of his that you would recommend?
12 Rules for Life. And I think it just came out in 2021. And I think he's actually authoring a follow-up book on that. And he's very published. He has many other, I believe, pieces of content out there, but 12 Rules for Life was really, really transformational for me.
Okay. So I'll link those two books on your show notes page, Bryce, at pyppodcast.com, team, along with how to connect with Bryce on his socials and his podcast. It's interesting because during the pandemic, Dr. Peterson was out being very vocal on some of the podcasts that I listen to regularly. And I really resonated with his message because he is a contrarian.
Yeah.
And I'm a contrarian. I do not follow the mold, if you will, which has its blessings and it also has the law of polarity. It has its downsides.
Yeah,
which,
totally.
You know what? But that's okay. So yeah, the 12 rules for life and then extreme ownership team, worth adding to your library. And before we say goodbye, Bryce, what would you like to leave listeners with today? What are some parting words?
Grounded in stoicism. And it's interesting, human nature, and we all know this to be true. We think that we have so much time, but at the end of the day, time is so precious and fleeting. And this, as much as a piece of advice it is for you and your audience, it is for me. But really, we need to value every single moment. We know this to be true, but things can be taken away. Literally, our existence is hanging on on a silver thread at best. So really cherish the time with yourself, cherish the time with your loved ones, and really kind of going back to that point about living a life of meaning and purpose is way more fulfilling and will leave you in a way better long-term place than leading a life chasing temporary feelings, temporary emotions. And if you can do that, I'm very confident whenever our time comes, which is coming for us, we'll look back and realize, hey, that was a life well lived. And that's really my parting message for you today.
Hey team, Mary Lou here. Who's number one in football changes from year to year. Fashion trends come and with musical tastes, but leadership skills, they never go out of style. In fact, these days, leadership is an essential survival skill for a world that demands more from us than ever before. To succeed these days, you need to know how to show up for yourself so that you can then do the work you love with people you want. The Play Your Position Leadership Playbook helps you do this, and it's free. Go to pyppodcast.com to download your copy today. If being more successful this year, next year, in the 21st century is on your to-do list, get your copy of the Play Your Position Leadership now. pyppodcast.com. It's at the top of the page. You can't miss it. That's pyppodcast.com, and start being more of the leader you are meant to be today. This podcast was produced by Daniel Romeros. Show notes for this episode can be found over at pyppodcast.com. I'm Mary Lou Kaiser. Thanks for listening.
Here at the Play Your Position podcast, we believe that the road to self-mastery and a life well lived starts with answering the call to leadership. That's when the fun really begins. Send this episode to any friends who might need to hear the inspiration and ideas you heard today. And feel free to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform.